I mean, I cried every time I found out a friend was pregnant. Baby showers were hard.
Hello. Thank you for coming today and visiting with me. Can you start with introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about hobbies, interests, work?
Yeah, my name is Lacey. I currently am a mother of 4. Before I was a mom, I have a degree in accounting, and I worked as an auditor. And I did that for about 8 years before I had my first babies, and now I get to be home with my kids full time. My hobbies, I love anything crafty. My favorites, I think, are knitting and crocheting. Just a nice relaxing thing to do. I love running, maybe jogging. I don't go very fast or very far. I call it running. Some people probably call that jogging. And cookies are my favorite treat.
Cookies are good. Okay, so we're going to talk today about your journey with infertility. So can you take us back to when you first realized that getting pregnant wasn't going to be so straightforward?
So, when my husband and I first decided we wanted to start a family, about 5 months in, I did get pregnant, and I had a miscarriage. And after the miscarriage, I had irregular periods for a while, and I just thought that was the normal, what happened after miscarriage. But after about a year of that, we went into a doctor, and after a year, the doctor wasn't too concerned still with that. And so maybe it may have been another year or so before we realized that there could be a problem. And I always thought that it was my issue, like that something had happened with me when we had that miscarriage, that my body wasn't regular or something. So the very last thing we tested was my husband, and come to find out, that's where our infertility came from. And once we knew that was the case, then we were able to better pursue the right kind of fertility treatments for what was going to work for us.
Okay. So how did you accept that?
Not super great. I was at that phase of my life where my friends were having babies. I wanted a baby. I was always one growing up that I thought I would be the one that got married at 19 and had a baby by 21, and just got to be a stay-at-home mom from the begin with, which is what I wanted. But that's not how it happened for me. I didn't get married until I was 24 when we got married, and it's silly to say this now, but at the time I thought that I was way past my prime, and I didn't think that it was very fair. The first couple years were hard. About the 3rd year in, I kind of gave up on it a little bit. Not that I didn't want the baby, but gave up more on trying to get pregnant. I gave up trying the fertility treatments. And then about a year later, when I really decided I wanted a baby, then we buckled down and did some more intensive fertility treatments.
So
My husband was always more optimistic about it than I was, but no, I didn't think it was fair.
Yeah. How did you cope with that emotionally?
I cried every time I found out a friend was pregnant. Baby showers were hard. Yeah, I did have an experience, a few years into it, where I had an experience where I know that my Savior spoke to me, in my mind, and told me, it's going to be a while, but it's going to be all right. And it wasn't the answer I wanted. That it's going to be a while part was not the part that I wanted to hear. But I always knew that it was going to be all right, because I knew that my Savior had promised me that it was going to be okay. And that did help, having that knowledge. Or I don't know if knowledge is the right word, but having that comfort, having that assurance that even though it wasn't going to happen when or the way I wanted it to, that it was going to work out.
So what was your path forward?
So once we finally realized that, it was my husband's, that it was male factor infertility, as they call it, then we tried to do artificial insemination, and we tried that I think 5 times, which looking back is silly. We should have given it once or twice and gave up, but I just didn't think that in vitro was for me. I thought at the time in vitro was a big scary process that was for, other people. I didn't think it was for me, and we did finally resort to in vitro, and it worked the first time. It was great. We got pregnant with, it's funny, when they were putting in the 2 embryos, before I even knew if I was going to be pregnant, before the 2 embryos were even in me, my husband said, I just saw like a little vision in my mind. We're having twin boys. And I thought, let's not get too excited here. We don't even know, first of all, this is going to work. Second of all, we don't even know if it does work, if it's going to be 2, and let's just wait and see where it is. But it worked, and I got pregnant, and a couple weeks later, we did an ultrasound and found out it was twins, and I guess we both just thought twin boys. His vision was right, and as it turned out, we had 2 girls, and I was thrilled. I was always the one that wanted to have daughters and do the hair bows and the matching clothes and stuff. I was pretty excited. I felt like I felt like that trial was over, and I thought it was like the time to be happy. I mean, I was sick. It wasn't necessarily a harder or sicker pregnancy than any others, but I was sick, you know, like, and I had twins, and I think sometimes, I don't know, they say you can be more sick from that. I don't know. But it was all appearing to be a normal pregnancy.
Okay, so tell us more about as the pregnancy moved along.
So everything was great. And in fact, when I was pregnant with my twin girls, I was working with a girl who was also pregnant with twin girls. Her twins were identical, and they had that twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome where one's bigger than the other. And she ended up they took her twins at 35 weeks because one was like significantly bigger than the other. And I just remember thinking, like, well, I'm so glad that's not going to happen to me. 35 weeks, that's way too soon. I was just so glad that because mine were fraternal, that wasn't going to happen to me. Well, when I hit 25 weeks, I went in for what I thought was a normal ultrasound. And they went in, and when they did the ultrasound, they could see that I was fully effaced, like 100% effaced. And at the time when they told me that, I didn't even know what the word effaced meant. Like, I hadn't, like the baby books you read, like, I hadn't even gotten that far yet. I hadn't even made it to the 3rd trimester. So I was 4 centimeters dilated, fully effaced at 25 weeks. And by this point, it was too late to do a cerclage. There was nothing left to sew up. And so, and at the time I didn't get it. Like, I didn't know what this meant. At the time we were living in Kansas City, our families were in Idaho and Utah, and later that day we were supposed to fly home to Utah to have baby showers and stuff. And because I didn't understand the gravity of what was going on, I said to the doctor, I said, well, I mean, can I still get on a plane and like go to these baby showers? And she's like, no. And I said, well, could we drive? I was so desperate to see my family. They hadn't seen me pregnant. And she said, no, you can't drive. She's like, you're getting on an ambulance and you're going to a different hospital. And that's when it struck me that this was a problem, that this wasn't good. So at that other hospital, I mean, I was stable. I wasn't progressing or anything, but they watched me really closely for a few days, and then they transferred me into like a long-term, like, side room down the hall, and it was really lonely there for a couple days. And then my water broke at 25 weeks and 5 days, and they were born the next day.
Wow.
Yeah.
And how were they? How big? And
So one of them was 1 pound 7 ounces. The other was 1 pound 11 ounces. I mean, considering the fact that they were born shy of 26 weeks, they were okay. They had everything wrong with them that you would expect for a baby at that gestation, but they didn't necessarily have any other complications. It was a 3-month hospital stay. One of them ended up having a heart surgery that's common for preemies. They were both on ventilators, oxygen. One did have to be on an oscillator for a little bit. They both had the feeding tubes, but really, we were truly, truly blessed in knowing that they were going to be okay. And that's one thing I should add. There's a lot of unknowns to a lot of people at 26 weeks, and our families were really concerned, our friends were really concerned. But I want to go back to that time when I told you when we were trying to have a baby, and I had that assurance that it's going to be a while, but it's going to be all right. And that kept playing over in my mind that this NICU thing's going to be a while, but it's going to be all right. Like, my husband and I, we both just knew that it was going to turn out all right. And in the long run it did. And I'm not saying that those were an easy 3 months of them in the NICU, and they were a little bit delayed for the first 2 years of life, but they're 8 now, and they're fine now. They truly are.
That's awesome. Let's talk more about your NICU experience. Can you tell us a little bit about the day-to-day of that?
Yeah, so I've got to say, one was in for 93 days, the other one was 96 days. They came home 3 days apart, and the hospital was about 45 minutes away, and I did not miss a single day, which was kind of a lot considering how far away that was. But yeah, at the beginning, there wasn't a lot that I could do for them. They were too small and too sick even to be held. I mean, we could put our hands in and like do what they called hand containment, where we touch them, but we couldn't we couldn't hold them. So at the beginning, I actually went back to work. There was nothing I could do for my babies, and so to fill the time, I went to work, and I would go to the NICU in the evenings, and the few things at that point that I could do with them is I could, change their diaper, take their temperature, put my hands on them. I think there's probably one other thing that I could do that I'm not thinking of, but just basic, they call them their cares, and that's really all I could do. And I could only do it, you get in with the baby once every 3 hours. That's when they change their diaper, take their temperature, set up their feeding tubes and stuff, and that's all I could do. As time progressed, I did get to hold them. They were born May 2nd, and it happened to be at 11 days old. It was Mother's Day, and that was the first time I got to hold them, which wasn't the highlight that I thought it was going to be. The day before I got to hold them was the first time that they had opened their eyes. They were born with their eyes sealed shut, and so I hadn't seen their little eyes. And so when they were 10 days old, they finally opened their eyes for the first time. And to me, that was much more magical than being able to hold them on my chest. Not saying I didn't enjoy holding them, but just seeing into their little eyes, they finally seemed real. They seemed alive, and so that was kind of cool. And then once I got a hold of them, then even at that, they couldn't be held every day because it was too stressful for them to come out, and so you could hold them once every couple days. And so for about the first month, I really only went once a day. And then as they started getting a little bit stronger, and able to get out more often, then I would go morning and night, and I would go to work in between and do that. One of the things I loved being able to do was giving them a bath. They had a bath, I think, twice a week, and we just squeezed warm water over them and their isolettes and put some soap on them, and I liked that because it was more involvement. I wasn't able to do very much with them, but I loved knowing that I could help them get a bath. So
take care of them.
Yeah, so that was kind of some of the day-to-day stuff. Oh, I should say they were 6 weeks old before they could be held together. And I remember being so excited to hold them together, and I wanted to see that twin bond as everybody talked about, and I had them both right here on my chest. And they did not like it. They were not used to each other. They both kind of trying to push the other one away from each other, and I thought, I was like, they've been in separate isolates so long, I was afraid that they weren't going to have that twin bond that they have. And for a while they didn't. For the first quite a while, they did not like being together. They liked having their own space, but that has since changed, and they are friends now, thank goodness.
Oh. So tell us a little bit about the emotional toll that took on you, and how did you cope with that?
I will say the part for me that was the hardest was when I was discharged from the hospital and when I had to leave and go home. I thought my heart had been left at the hospital. I remember I bawled and bawled and bawled and bawled, and it was so hard leaving him that first time. I don't even know how to put into words how sad that was for me. And it was never easy leaving them when I would leave the hospital, but I don't think I ever cried after that first time, leaving them there. And there were other hard times, when I realized that my babies were both going to come home with heart monitors, and one's going to come home with oxygen. I guess I had just pictured that when they came home, they would be healthy. And when I realized they're going to come home and they're still going to need help, I remember that being hard. I remember that I specifically didn't go to a church function that night because I knew everyone was going to ask how they were doing, and I didn't want to say, well, I guess they're fine, but they're not as good as I hoped that they were going to be. So I do remember that being hard. I think the fact that I got to work helped. I think it helped because I had something else to put my mind on. You know what I mean? I wasn't at home twiddling my thumbs. It was a really surreal feeling, especially at first, like going into work. And this is coming from a person who always had wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And I did the career thing up until I had him, and I just thought I'll work and then I'll have kids. And it was really weird to have to go back to what used to be my normal life, knowing that my life had completely changed. I was now a mother, and yet here I was back at this job that I thought I was going to do until the time came that I got to be a mom. So it was a really surreal feeling, thinking I kind of had two lives. I had my old normal life where everybody else's lives had gone on the same, and then I had this life at the NICU where I, had my babies, and it was really weird to have two separate things. But I do think you had asked the emotional toll. I think the fact that I had things to occupy my time helped tremendously. And I will say, and I think I mentioned as the time wore on, I was able to do more and more things with the babies, and I spent less and less time at work and more time at the hospital, and that was good.
You said that one of them had some heart issues.
Yes.
And surgery? How old were
Yes.
they when they had the surgery?
So it was only one that had the surgery. So I'm trying to think exactly. I know Mother's Day, they were 11 days old, and I could hold her, but that's the only time I got to hold her, because a few days later she had that surgery, maybe like 2.5 weeks.
She was tiny.
She was little, and then she was pretty sick from that, and so I couldn't hold her probably for another 2, maybe even 3 weeks after that. And I do remember that daughter in particular. I didn't realize it until she didn't have it anymore. I remember she was probably 5 or 6 weeks old, and I remember looking at her, and her eyes were alert. And up until then, she had what I guess now would describe as sick eyes. Like they just were, a little too drugged and not like quite as dark. And I remember that first day that she didn't have those sick eyes. It really was magical that she was finally starting to become a little thing. Oh, a funny thing is, I mentioned they had their eyes sealed shut when they were born. They were a few days old before I realized they didn't have nipples. That hadn't developed yet.
Wow.
So they just had a nice smooth chest with nothing there.
Huh.
So kind of a funny thing.
Yeah, you wouldn't think about that kind of stuff. Huh?
No. One thing that was so hard was I guess coming to the realization that I was a mom, but I couldn't yet be their mom. There was only so much that I could do for them, and that was hard. And I remember one time, it was close to the time that they were going to come home, and one of them had learned how to take a bottle, and because she had learned how to take a bottle, I didn't know this, but because she knew how to take a bottle, then if I wasn't there, then the nurses would give her a bottle, and I didn't know that. And I remember coming into the hospital here in the morning, and I found out that one of the nurses had given her a bottle in the nighttime, and as silly as it sounds, I almost lost it, because until then, everything that the nurses and doctors had done for my babies was kind of routine. They'd change their diapers, hook up a feeding tube, give him a bath if I wasn't there to give him a bath. But the thought of a nurse holding my baby and feeding her a bottle and bonding with her, that was hard. That was really hard, because I was her mother. I was the one that was supposed to be able to hold her and bond with her and feed her. And so knowing that I couldn't be there 100% of the time to do that for her was really, really hard.
Yeah. And so how did you get over that?
I had to. I mean,
Yeah.
it wasn't, they didn't let you stay at the hospital full time to
Right.
feed him 24/7, and I got my chance.
Yeah.
She came home a few weeks later, and I got the chance to do those midnight feedings with her and get to do those midnight bonding times. It was just the fact that up until then I hadn't felt like the nurses and doctors had like a bonding role with my kids, but when they did get to do like that mothering kind of thing, I thought, I'm the mom. I should be the one that gets to do that.
Did you feel like at any time that others were making choices for your children that you wished you could have made for them?
There were a couple times, yes. But I don't think at that point I understood like hospital protocols and when you're supposed to call the mother and when you're not, or when they can just go ahead and give him a medicine or make a decision. So yes, there were a few times with that, but there was, but when I was upset by it was when I was still a new thing, and I just wasn't used to how they did things in the NICU. There was never anything that they did that I would have not have them do. Mm-hmm. I probably wouldn't have wanted to feed my baby a bottle, but they had to, and mm-hmm. so. But no, they didn't do anything with my children that I wouldn't have wanted done. There was some things that I thought they would have asked me before they did it, and they didn't. But nothing that I wouldn't have wanted done.
Yeah. So what kind of lessons did you learn from the NICU time, and even some blessings that have come from that?
Well, for sure, there are silver linings to the NICU. I feel like at least my experience was that it was a more calm place than what I think a lot of people maybe imagine it is. The first few days are like a little hectic in there with mm-hmm. getting the baby's situations figured out, but after that it's relatively a peaceful place. I feel like a silver lining is that they come home on a schedule. Like when I brought my babies home, they knew that you eat and then you go back to sleep, and they knew how to eat. And I had all the help in the world with helping them learn how to breastfeed and all that stuff. So that's definitely a silver lining. And from what I hear, it's hard to bring a baby straight home from the hospital and they don't know their days from nights. Mine did. So I felt like that was a huge blessing. I mean, another huge blessing is, at least where the hospital we were at, was if you got them out to hold them, they wanted you to sit and hold them for a whole hour. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, when do you get the chance at home to just sit and hold your baby for a whole hour? So that was a blessing in disguise. I mean, I'd go and I'd get one out and I'd hold her for an hour, and then I'd get the next one out and I'd hold her for an hour, and it was wonderful. Time that I never would have gotten otherwise.
Mm-hmm. So tell us about when you brought them home.
It wasn't as hectic as maybe others would expect that it would be. I was lucky. My husband was able to take a week off of work, and then my mom came out for a few weeks, and my sister came out for a week and a half. So I had a lot of help. But that said, I mean, one of them was still on oxygen, but they both had these heart monitors, so it was a big tangle of cords everywhere, and more of a hassle. Like going anywhere was hard because not only did you have two babies, but you had the two heart monitors, the oxygen tank, whatever. But it wasn't as hard as what you would think it was. It was just fun to have them home. I felt like by the time I finally got them home, I finally got to be the mom that I had wanted to be for all those years. When I got to have them in my house and I got to hold them on my time, it was good. It was really good.
Can you share some of the challenges and maybe some of the great things about having your babies home with you?
Yeah. Well, this is silly, but one of the great things was just being able to hold them in our own home, like without having to have doctors and nurses in and out, and without having, when you're at the hospital, they would only let them out of their isolate for like 1 hour at a time. And I remember the night that they didn't come home on the same day, they came home a few days apart. And I remember that first night we brought one home, and I sat on the couch and I was holding her, and the Olympics were on, and I just thought, this is the very best thing ever to have my baby. And I knew I didn't have to put her back in the isolate, that I could just sit and hold her, and I knew that nobody was going to come bug me to, do something with her or come talk to me, that I could just enjoy that. So that really was great to just be able to hold her and be with her. One of the challenges, just as an example, I remember they had been home, I think it was on my husband's birthday, which is September 26th. She came home on August 2nd. So it had almost been 2 months since I'd had babies home. And it was the first time that I ever went anywhere by myself with no other help. And I remember specifically it being my husband's birthday, because I'd printed off some pictures of him holding the two girls that I wanted to give him for his birthday. And I sent him to the store to be printed. And I remember I went into the store, and I had a heart monitor over each shoulder. I had an oxygen tank on one shoulder. I had a diaper bag on one shoulder, and I was carrying both the babies. And I walked into, I think it was CVS, and I go to the picture counter only to realize that I had sent the pictures to a different CVS. And so I had to go do that all over again. I thought, this isn't fun. But I mean, it was doable. It was just kind of a funny thing that I realized at that point that, like, gone were the days of just running in and out to do an errand, and I know that all moms get that, but I think it was a little harder for me than maybe a normal. So
Now you have more children. Can you share a little bit more?
yeah, so it took a while for me to want more. Not that I didn't want more, but I was so happy to have my girls that I just wanted to enjoy every minute of them. I was not overwhelmed. I loved every bit about having them. I loved every bit about having twins. But I say I wasn't overwhelmed, and I didn't want to be overwhelmed. I was just afraid that, like, by adding more, that it was going to overwhelm me. And I just felt like I waited so long to get these two. I really, really just want to enjoy them. So we enjoyed them for about 3 years, and then we started talking about, oh, maybe, and they were about 4.5 by the time my husband finally convinced me, like, let's at least go to the doctors and see what it would take. And we just went straight to in vitro this time. We were not going to mess around with anything else. We did have some frozen embryos left over from when I'd gotten pregnant with the girls. And my husband and I both just assumed that because the in vitro worked the first time with them, we just assumed that it was going to be a real easy, we've got leftover embryos, we'll put them in, it'll be done. And it's worth noting that after we had the twin girls and knowing how possible it is to have twins with in vitro, and knowing that in vitro is going to be our next route, even ever since we brought the girls home from the hospital, my husband and I both just thought we'd have another set of twins. Like, we never even talked about having another baby. We only ever talked about having more babies, which is so silly because even with the chances of having twins with in vitro, there was still a higher likelihood that we would have one. But it's funny, we only ever talked about having twins again. So when we decided we were ready to have more, we went to the fertility doctor, and the very first thing that she said was, well, because your girls were born so early, we can't put in more than one embryo. She said, we are not going to risk that. And she kept reiterating to me that just because your girls born at 26 weeks turned out as well as they did, she's like, you've got to remember that not all babies born at 26 weeks turn out like they did. And she's like, and there's no guarantee that you would make it to 26 weeks with twins again. And so she said twins are not an option. And it sounds silly, but my husband and I both left so disappointed because we just, in the back of our minds, thought for sure that there was going to be another set of twins for us. And we ended up waiting for other reasons. We didn't try to do in vitro for, I think, probably 4 or 5 months after that initial. And in that time, I actually went and got a second opinion on that. I went to a maternal fetal medicine doctor, and she told me the same thing. She said, you've got an incompetent cervix. She's like, because you had it with twins, she's like, if you had twins again, I mean, she's like, this would happen again. And she's like, you just can't risk having another set of 26 weeks twins or earlier. And so we went with it, and it wasn't what we had thought we were going to have. But I was excited. I was excited to have one. I had never thought having twins was hard. I never thought it was any harder than having one. I always thought, if you're going to feed one, feed both. If you're going to change a diaper, change two. So I never thought having twins was hard, but I was excited for one baby. I was excited to just have one and enjoy that. When we had our first set of twins, we were living in Kansas City. We since moved to Utah, but our embryos were in Kansas City. And it's worth noting that they had to ship our embryos to Utah, and they straight up FedEx them. Like, they go on FedEx. And I thought that was so funny that, like...
Not the stork.
No. And I've never, ever, ever prayed for the FedEx guy, but I was praying for the FedEx guy that he would keep my embryos safe. So anyways, that's kind of a side note. But when we did do the in vitro, they put one embryo in, everything was perfect. Everything with me was perfect. I already said before, the infertility problem was with my husband. And so everything with me was perfect. The embryo was already created. It was a perfect embryo. There was no reason that it shouldn't have taken, but it didn't. And it was disappointing. I guess we just thought it was so easy the first time. Like, I shouldn't say easy, but it took the first go around. We just assumed that it would, and it didn't. And so you kind of got to wait a few months in between. We ended up doing in vitro a total of 3 times, putting one embryo in each time, and it never took. And by that point, I was done. It wasn't as that year of my life. I can't compare that to what it feels like to be infertile, to go through that time of infertility, because I had my girls and I loved my girls and I was so fulfilled with them that I thought maybe this is it, My husband was pretty sure there was one more though. I wasn't ready to be done having little kids at home, but I kind of felt like if we did in vitro 3 times and it was perfect every time, there was no reason any one of those should not have taken, but they didn't. But my husband was pretty sure. He's like, I know that we have another one out there, and I wasn't ready to send my girls were getting ready to go to 1st grade. I wasn't ready to be done having kids at home. I felt like I only had one chance at it. I wanted another chance. But then I also felt like we did in vitro 3 times. Like, if there was supposed to be another baby for me, like, why wouldn't one of these have worked? So I almost wondered if that was just the Lord's way of saying, you're done. Really there was no reason one of those shouldn't have worked. So even though I, selfishly wanted another kid, I thought, well, maybe this was the Lord's way of telling me we're done. But my husband knew that we were not done. He's like, I just know that there's another baby for us. And so with that, we went for it. I mean, it wasn't like I didn't want more. I just didn't want to have to continue to go through this. But after having done those 3 failed in vitros, we didn't have any more embryos left. And remember, they were frozen embryos, which shouldn't have made a difference. But when we went to the in vitro again, the doctor said, so she's like, I don't really know what to do. She's like, I don't want to put 2 embryos in you because we don't want you to get pregnant with twins. She's like, but I also don't want to put in 1 embryo and have it fail and then have to rely on frozen embryos again. So because we were going to be doing this fresh cycle and going to be having fresh embryos, that's what she was afraid of. If we put 1 in, normally you would just rely on the frozen ones, but for me, the frozen ones hadn't worked. And so she said, do you want to try to put 2 embryos in and see what happens? And I think my husband and I were both like, well, yeah, we're down with that. It wasn't that we didn't want another set of twins, and it wasn't necessarily that we were hoping for another set of twins. We just always thought that there was going to be another set of twins. So we put in the 2 embryos, and sure enough, they took. So I don't know why those 3 embryos that we put in didn't work. I just like to think that we were meant to have another set of twins, that our last 2 babies were meant to come together. So anyways, when I did get pregnant with the 2nd set of twins, that in vitro doctor was a little embarrassed. She's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this happened. And she referred me back to the maternal fetal medicine where I had gone the first time for a second opinion. And I went into that maternal fetal medicine appointment, and it was a different doctor that I met with. But I know after that appointment, he went and talked to the doctor the first time. And she said, I told her not to put in 2 embryos. And because by this point, I had put myself in a little bit of a pickle, because I was pregnant with twins. I had had an incompetent cervix before. The doctors were not hopeful that I was going to be able to carry a set of twins to term. And so this maternal fetal medicine doctor, the new guy, not the one I had met with previously, but the new guy, he didn't know what to do. And I guess I just naively thought that I could get a cerclage and that a cerclage would solve my problems. And he said that cerclages just haven't proven effective with twin pregnancies. They're great with a singleton, but they just haven't proven successful with twins. And so he was leery to do it because there are some risks involved with doing a cerclage. And I guess I forgot a little bit what transpired, but a week or so later, I got a personal phone call from that doctor, and he had gone to like a training or a seminar or something where he was with a bunch of other maternal fetal medicine doctors from around the country. And at the end of the seminar, or whatever it was, meeting, whatever they were having, there was a question and answer time, and he actually stood up and he presented to all these maternal fetal medicine doctors from across the country my scenario, and he said, look, I've got this patient. She had twins at 26 weeks, shy of 26 weeks. She's pregnant with another set of twins. What would you do? And almost all of them said, I would take the chance on the cerclage. It may or may not be effective, but I would take the chance on it. And I was so flattered isn't the right word. Honored isn't even the right word. Happy, I felt really grateful maybe that he cared enough about me as his patient to put me out there to all those other doctors and to get that second opinion. So we went ahead and we did the cerclage, and I made it almost to 34 weeks with my second set of twins. And it was a smooth pregnancy. There was, I wasn't as sick the second time around, although I think that was just luck, but I never had to go on bed rest. You know, the first set of twins, I was in the hospital on bed rest for a week. The second set of twins, they were great. They were born just shy of 34 weeks, boy and a girl. And my little boy was in the NICU for 3 weeks. My little girl was in the NICU for 2. And I mean, to me, I remember joking around with my husband. I'm like, man, 3 weeks in the NICU seems like way less than 3 months, because it was like all of a sudden they were home. And so that's how we got that second set of twins, that we just deep down in our hearts knew, somehow we knew that it was going to be that way.
I'm curious if there's more twins.
In my future?
Yeah, do you have more deep down feelings?
No, I don't. And in fact, maybe this is a tangent story, but after the second in vitro, where we got pregnant with our second set of twins, we had 13 embryos left over, which is unreal to have that many embryos left over. And we didn't know what to do with them. And I was pretty sure in my heart of hearts that we were done, that there was no more. I didn't want any more, but I just knew that we were done. And my husband, even though he didn't necessarily want to be done, he agreed that we were done. And so, again, this is a different side story, but when you have frozen embryos, you can either pay for them indefinitely, you can keep them in storage and pay that annual storage fee every year, which varies like from year to year, like between $500 and $750. It's not super cheap. If you're gonna have more babies, it's way worth to pay that $500 to $750 a year to keep your embryos. But so some people really truly do think that you shouldn't destroy an embryo, that it's like a baby to be, and that you've got to keep paying for them. I didn't feel like that was right. So you can do that. You can destroy them. You can let them be given to adoption. Like you can do it like an anonymous adoption, or you can do choose a family that you want them to go to, or you can donate the embryos to science. And I was like, we went to all this work to get the embryos. I kind of wanted to give them to somebody else. But my husband and I couldn't agree on the terms. I wanted it to be 100% anonymous. I didn't want to know if they came to anything. I didn't want to know who had them. I just wanted to be able to give another family the gift of life that we were blessed with. But my husband wanted to choose who the family was. He still felt like they were his babies. I guess I just didn't feel like they were mine. I felt like it was a body, but I didn't feel like they were my babies or like somehow spiritually connected to me. But my husband did, and so he wanted to be able to choose a family they would go to. But I thought if we did that I would never be able to leave that family alone, and I would always be poking my nose in their business. So anyway, since we couldn't agree to the terms on who we would give the embryos to for adoption, we decided to donate them to scientific research. And I feel great about it. I feel like somebody else had to give their embryos to research to get the medicine where it is today so that I could have my babies. Some people think it's morally wrong to destroy an embryo. I don't think I'm going to get to the other side and have God tell me, you should have paid that $750 a year to keep them in storage. I think a loving Heavenly Father understands where we were at, and I think He's happy that I gave him to research so that science can get better for future IVF families.
I think that's amazing. That's awesome. Okay, so I want to know a little bit about what you've learned, what you've gained, lessons of life, and some advice you would give to others.
So again, about the advice I would give to somebody, this is coming from somebody who's been through it. I'm not currently going through it, so I feel like maybe this is a little easier for me to say now, because I don't want to say I got my happy ending, but I kind of did. I mean, I got to be a mother. My NICU babies turned out great, and I fully understand that not everybody who goes through infertility gets to have a baby. I fully understand that not every mother with a NICU baby gets to have their babies come home. But that said, I would tell you to seize the day and enjoy the moment. With the infertility, thankfully, I mean, I was pretty bummed about it all when we were going through it, and I'm not saying I was a Debbie Downer every day, and I wouldn't say that I overly dwelled on it, but my husband was definitely more of the seize the day kind of person. I'm so grateful that I had him, because of him, we were married almost 6 years before we had any kids. And we got to travel. I had a job that I loved. We got to save a bunch of money. We got to do all sorts of fun things that we as a couple never would have gotten to do if we had kids a year into our marriage like we thought we wanted. So I would tell anybody going through infertility to find something else to do, because you only got like a small window every month to focus on having a baby, you know, like spend the other 29 days doing something that you enjoy. I will say this, I do feel blessed in the fact that I had a career that I liked. It wasn't even just a job. I had a career. I was successful in what I did. I enjoyed what I did. So I wasn't home twiddling my thumbs waiting to have a baby. I was able to be an auditor. I was able to be a career woman, and I think maybe that's part of the reason why I've been able to enjoy being a stay-at-home mother as much as I have, because I have had a career, and I don't feel unfulfilled from not having that. You know, I got to have that experience to do that. So yeah, to anybody who's going through the infertility, I would tell them, focus on it 2 days a month, and the other time, start a new hobby, travel, work towards something different, because you can't control that fertility. You can't. That's God's timing. But there are other things that you can do with your time. So that's what I would say, only because I feel blessed to have had a husband who understood that and said, hey, let's take advantage of this time that's just us. Let's see the world. Let's see the country. And I'm grateful that I had a good job, that I was able to, be productive with my time.
So now you have a beautiful family, and
Thank
that's
you.
a huge blessing.
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
I want to know what other blessings you feel you've gained through this experience.
I have definitely learned to understand that the Lord is mindful of us, and that He does things obviously on His timetable. That's so much easier for somebody to say than for somebody to accept.
Perspective, and when you're looking
But
back,
that said,
especially.
is so true. Like, I've definitely learned. I have become so grateful for medicine, not just for the infertility medicine, but for the modern medical of the NICU. I mean, my girls, my 2 older girls especially, wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the miracles of modern medicine and the NICU and all that. So grateful for those things for sure.